The Data Cloud Diaries, using the Bulk Ingestion API for airline flight data, Part 1. Welcome back to another episode with the Data Cloud Diaries as we dive into learning Data Cloud inside and out. In the last couple of videos, we talked about how to bring data into Data Cloud. Now, there's the standard using S3 and there's standard mechanisms for bringing data in, but there is a way in which you can push data in. So in the last two videos, we focused in on the Streaming Ingestion API, how to stream small packets of data into your Data Cloud instance. Now what we're looking at is we're going to be looking at how to bring bulk amount of data, large amount of data, but instead of having Data Cloud reach out on a scheduled manner and pull it, we're going to be pushing it into the API. So it's a different API, but we're actually can push into the same object that we did with the Streaming API. So this push is going to be using my same C# inside of Visual Studio. And we're going to be pulling flight data from my flight API. And we're then going to be building CSVs and pushing them in using the Bulk API. Let's take a look at this. So here's an API here's a website that I'm not actually using, but it's really interesting and you can check on what's happening. This is called FlightAware, and you can see that I can see all the flights. You're able to see the flights coming in. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and this way I can see all the flights coming and going. This is public information. So what I'm using is an API called AeroDataBox on Rapid API to getting flight schedules, and I can pull historical schedules and load them in. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at pulling that data and pushing it into Salesforce Data Cloud. So looking here, I'm in my Postman, I'm hitting AeroDataBox, and I'm giving it a request to bring me about 10 minutes of data. So this is on 12/14 from 3 o'clock to 3:10, and I can get about 800 lines of JSON code, but I could easily widen this range. Instead of going from 3 o'clock to 3:10, I could be going from, let's say, noon to 3:10. So this will be about 10 hours of data. And so what I've got is about 4 or 5 hours of 3 hours of data. So this is a lot more data showing me all the data that is landing and takeoffs from Phoenix Airport. So I have the ability to pull this data from the API. Now in the past video, I showed that you would go to Data Cloud Setup, you would go to the Ingestion API, and I configured an airport traffic object, and I created it here and uploaded the schema. And as in the previous session, what I did was I generated a YAML file. So here is a YAML file, which is a definition of an API. And I had generated this and built this up. From the previous meetings, the previous sessions, I had shown you how I had the deserialization of the AeroData API from aircraft, airlines, airport, flight details. And then from there, I constructed the object that I wanted it to represent this data in Salesforce. So I created an airport traffic representation. So this is a C# representation, which had what I call a flattened data model, primary key. We had a traffic date time because we know that engagement data requires a date time. And I'd flattened to the departure airport, arrival airport information, number, call sign. So all of this data I flattened into a C# representational structure. And then I generated a YAML file for it. And so this is a YAML file that I then switched over and went into the Ingestion API and used that YAML file to define the schema. So I now have the schema of the airport traffic. Then we created a data stream. So once you had a schema, then I created a data stream for the airport traffic, creating the data stream object from the ingestion API. And then from this data stream, I mapped it and created both data lake and data model objects. So I now have an airport traffic data model object, DMO, that is a representation of the data that I chose the structure for. So the structure was defined in a YAML. The YAML was used to create the ingestion API connector. The connector was used to create the stream, mapped to the DLO, data lake object, and mapped to the DMO. And from there, I then run C# code that I wrote that made an API call and pushed the data in. So let's take a look at that. And I'm going quickly through what we did in the last session, and then going to be focusing on what needs to do on top of this for the bulk. So here I had an arrow config with the setup, and this is just reading things like the base URL, the API key for arrow, the Salesforce username, and what data space I'm using. So this is reading settings from a property file. And in arrow main, then what I'm doing is I had a choice, run direct, which is a direct call, and run in bulk. So if I go to arrow call, run direct, and I had shown this in the previous video, I created a source airport. I gave it a start time 10 minutes later because the streaming API is small bundles of data. And if you look on the help, so this is the help for the streaming insert, you'll see that the payload must be less than 200 kilobytes. So what we've got is for streaming insert small amounts of data. And this shows that you have to wrapper your data with a data envelope. So whatever your payload is here, you need to have a data colon for the payload. And then you need to be able to have your data access token in exchange response. So you need to convert from a Salesforce ACK bearer token to a Data Cloud data token. And then when you pass in your data, you can send it in straight. You can also send actions test in front of it to test. So this is the streaming API. And here I have my code, which is awaiting using a thread await, getting the flights, and it's getting a list of airport traffic objects. So it's been deserialized and converted to my target representational structure, which is airport traffic. Then I log it. And then what I'm going to do is I can send it either a straight insert, and we'll talk about the CSV in a moment. So in the straight insert, I have my Data Cloud, and I've updated the Data Cloud APIs since my previous video yesterday. And we're going to take a quick look in those. So first, we're going to look at the arrow API. So in the arrow, we have a base arrow API that has a call arrow method. And it takes a URL. It's doing a get. It's posting with the host and the API key. And then what it's doing is it's doing a wait and a using for proper resource management, and then returning the body. So this is a base arrow API I wrote. And then we have the arrow flight one. So what we have is when you call get flights by airport, this is used for both streaming and bulk. It's going to do a start date and an end date from the date times. And we actually have to use a very special format here coming in. So we're going to convert to the date time passing in for arrow. This is an arrow date time format. We're going to pass in the IATA code to the airport, and then we're going to deserialize this into the arrow data structures. But what I've written is an airport traffic controller class that's going to convert from their sub-object structures to my flattened structure. I've showed this a little bit in the last video, but right here it's going to take a list of flights, the arrow object, and it's going to convert it. And it's going to loop through and flatten the structure. And it's going to give me what I need for Data Cloud, which is a date time in a new date time format. This is a Data Cloud date time format. So now we're going to come into here. We need to convert to a Data Cloud datetime format, which we're doing a datetime parse. We're converting to UTC Universal Time. And then we need to do to go to Data Cloud, we need a special 9 decimal place fraction in order to go to with a culture invariant. So this is a special date time to be accepted by Data Cloud. Then what we're going to do, so that is our datetime util. And we were over in the arrow call. We were going to then do an insert. So we now have our data here, and we're going to do an insert direct. So what we're doing is a airport traffic ingest API method. It's a little different from the last video. And what we have is we have an insert. We're going to create a little wrapper, which has that wrapper that Data Cloud requires with the .data. We're going to then serialize the wrapper. We're going to create our post URL, and then we're going to call the await post. And the post URL is going to have the source, the airport traffic. So this becomes the data source. This becomes the object. And in this case, we're doing a test on this, and we're calling a post. So let's jump in to the post. So we're going to go to the base. I created a base class for my Data Cloud APIs. And what we're going to do is look at the post. So right up here, that's a get. We're going to look at the call post. So this method is passing in what verb we're using for the REST call. And down here, we're going to create the data access token, the Data Cloud access token. We're going to do the exchange where we're going to exchange the Data Cloud. We're going to exchange the Salesforce bearer token for the Data Cloud token. We're going to then make the request. We're going to pass in the string content JSON and get back the response. So this is the call immediate. And so now what we're going to do is take a look at the call immediate. And if we went to our Data Explorer and we went to SteveTechArc, data model, the air traffic, and then what I'm doing is I'm doing a value of dates in December, because when I loaded it with the ingest streaming API, we're going to go anything after November 30th and apply. So this is the data that I brought in the last video using the Streaming API. Now what we're going to do is we're going to build on top of this, and you've seen some of the modified code, and we're going to build it for bulk. We're not going to get all the way there, but we're going to start walking through. This is showing you the data coming from the API. Let's switch into bulk mode. So in bulk mode, let's look at the specs. So we had this limit of the amount of data that we could push, 200 kilobytes. And the whole purpose of Data Cloud is to move large amounts of data and do analytics. So what we need to do is do what's called bulk ingestion. So we have a bulk ingestion, and you'll see that the CSV cannot exceed 150 megs, so significantly more. You need a nice clean header file, and you have to set up the connector and the data stream in the connected app. So we've done all this with the streaming ingestion. What we're going to do is this walks through creating a job, and this follows a similar paradigm to Salesforce Bulk API. You're going to create a job, which will give you a job ID. You're going to upload one or many files using the upload function. Then you're going to close the job and initiate the process of the Bulk API. And then you're going to wait, and you can do a get job info where you can see the status of the job. So each of these are separate API calls using a CSV. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this and start walking through that process. So in arrow main, I created a run bulk. Let's go take a look at that. Okay, so here we're going to have a run bulk. We're going to load from Phoenix, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a different date range. This will be 10/3. So this is going to load a date time from 10/3 at 000, and we're going to take 12 hours of data, not 10 minutes, but 12 hours of data. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make the same call to the flight API by airport. That's all what we standard, but now I'm creating a CSV, and in the next iteration, I'll make this a dynamic date, where it's based on the date we pass in. What we're going to be doing is we're going to check to see if the CSV exists, and if it does exist, then delete it. So we're going to be starting with a fresh CSV. Now what we're going to do is we're using a class I wrote, which will be an air traffic CSV writer. So let's take a look at what it takes to write the CSV. So this is really straightforward in C#. This class is using CSV helper, a really simple and easy to use CSV. And what you're doing is I'm passing an IEnumerable, which is an array of airport traffic, and a target file path. So it's going to use a stream writer and create a CSV and write the records. So this will immediately create those records. Let's go into the arrow call. We're going to save to the CSV, and what we're actually going to do is we're going to comment out the bulk so it doesn't run. So this will make our call with our new date. It'll create a 10/3 file, but it won't do anything else. Let's watch this in action. So we go to our main, and we're not going to run direct. We're going to run bulk. And now we're going to run this. So we can watch. We'll run this as C#. And again, this is Visual Studio, which we're all comfortable with. And you'll see that it ran and found 596 records. Now, if we look in my File Explorer, we see the 10/3, and we're going to open it up. So I'm opening this up on my Mac. And you can see that we have all the flight data coming in from Phoenix, written to a CSV in a format that I designed that has some key pieces of information. It has a primary key, which includes the time, and then it also includes a date time, which is a date timestamp acceptable to Data Cloud. And this is 500 records. Now we can go larger, but this is just an example of about 12 hours of depart and arrivals out of a single airport. So we now have our CSV ready to go, and the next steps are to follow, which we'll do in the next video: creating the job, uploading the data, closing the job, and getting the job info. So this will be our next one. We have called the API. We have a nice large data set, 500 records that could easily be 5,000 or 50,000 or more, or 5 million. And what we're going to do is look in the next session about how we call these Bulk API, Bulk Ingestion API steps. So today we went through more detail about using the Streaming API, but then we added on the layers of creating the CSV file. And now we're starting to review the steps in order to open the job, upload the files, close the job, and close the job tells Data Cloud to start processing and then viewing the status. So I've already done a load and it is in there. And what we're going to be doing is in the next video, I'm going to walk you through these steps and see this data. So I hope this was helpful. Wait for part 2, when we dive in and actually see the steps and the bulk data load in action. Thank you for flying in bulk. We'll be picking it up next time and take you all the way to a landing. Hope you enjoyed this and have a great day.